Welcome back to the Real Estate 401k Show, and your host, Mike Weinstein, alongside Justin Frederick and Ryan Gerdes. We are going to make sense of what you have been reading about in the news. It involves the National Association of Realtors, how it relates to buyers agents getting paid. I know there's just been a lot of news out there about it, and you may be confused. You may not know exactly what it means. So, in essence, the National Association of Realtors was sued, and they are dealing with the Department of Justice right now. And because of this lawsuit, they have put together a proposed agreement, a proposed settlement agreement. It's important to note that this story came out on March 15th. Nothing is finalized. And at the end of the day, I don't know. We're going to get into the effects of it, guys. But NAR is offering to pay $418 million over the next 4 years to settle this lawsuit. Here's what it really, in essence, came down to, and I'm just going to break it down. Up until now, or up until recently, as a listing agent, the National Association of Realtors would not allow us to put somebody's house for sale on the MLS without offering some sort of compensation for the buyer's agent. Yes, that amount could be $1, but nonetheless, sellers were required to pay for a buyer's agent. And that is what the lawsuit is all about.
A little bit more accurately, it required the listing agent to offer compensation to the buyer broker, but the seller did have to absorb that.
Okay, fair enough.
Right.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And then, and also, and we're not going to mention other brokerages by names, but the government started going through training manuals of other brokerages that train their agents to basically say something sort of like, if you want to sell your house, the traditional co-broke is 6%. That is the standard. 3% to me is your listing agent, 3% to the buyer's agent, and the government took exception with that. So here are the changes that are involved, and I'm going to talk about two changes. So we'll talk about the first one right now. One of the biggest changes moving forward through this settlement proposal is not only is a seller not required or a listing agent required to pay a co-broke or a commission to the buyer's agent, Ryan, it can't be listed anywhere on the MLS. It's not to say that sellers can't pay and offer a co-broke for a buyer's agent. It just can't be marketed on the MLS where buyer's agents are seeing it. So two agents can have conversations outside of the MLS and so forth, but it can't be marketed inside the MLS. So here's the question, Ryan, and we got to be careful. We got to dance around words just in case the Department of Justice is listening to us. Now, does that help or does it hurt sellers? Because in essence, if I am selling something and another agent is representing the buyer, I would think that I might want to incentivize another agent to bring buyers. What's your take on this, and what does it do to sellers, and is it a big deal?
I mean, I have two takes on it. So I guess the first one is the big motivation the Department of Justice had in order to file this lawsuit was to increase transparency about how buyer brokers are being paid. And so their solution to that transparency issue is, why don't you guys go have a conversation in a back room about it to where nobody else can listen, right? And so that makes me scratch my head and say, well, doesn't that take away from the transparency, right? So that part makes me question, like, walk me through that, right? Like, how does that work out? In reality, the way that it's going to affect the industry. Now, at first, there's going to be all this hubbub and all this, the media is going crazy, and then all the interviews that are going down with the Department of Justice, they're pounding the table saying, now we've finally gotten justice on this big, huge conspiracy that has been affecting sellers. Now it's going to give power to the sellers to negotiate the best deal for them, so on and so forth. And I'm sitting over here thinking, well, this is how I've conducted business from day one. I have a very transparent conversation with my buyer because oftentimes we're doing transactions that aren't on the multiple listing service. We are kicking over rocks. We're finding different deals because 9 times out of 10, if I'm helping somebody build wealth through real estate, if it's hit the MLS, likely it's already too late. So I'm having that discussion. Hey, here's what my fees are. Here's what it looks like financially when we close. If you're okay with that, great. Let's move forward. If not, then
Find someone else.
Find someone else. So,
well, one of the ideas that I saw, I thought it was kind of comical, and at first I'm like, "There's no way that agents are really serious about that," but I don't know. So one of the ideas being floated by for listing agents to communicate to buyers agents that there is a commission on the table is take a picture of cookies and put them in the profile picture. So if you see 3 cookies on the plate, you know there's 3%. If you see 2.5 cookies, you know there's 2.5. I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying what I saw.
There's all kinds of funny memes going around that are in, how people are going to communicate that that a seller is willing to pay a cooperating brokerage, because at the end of the day, right? If I want to sell my house, I want to be competitive about it. I want it to move fast, and I want it to move for the most amount of money. I mean, there's staggering data that suggests that the person that sells their home for sale by owner, because that's ultimately what we're talking about, is just putting a sign out in the front yard, whether it be with a brokerage information on it or not, that you're selling for 12% under market value. That's raw data. Of course, there's some exceptions, but that's the rule. And so why the heck would I want to take a 12% bath, right? When I can pay 2 agents that are driving the market. You know, you threw out the number 6. If that was the number that was agreed
and
upon.
we are not saying officially that is the traditional or the expected co-broker in the past. We're just saying that was in another broker's training manual.
Right, and so I realize that number is passed around a lot, and so 12 or 6 is half of 12. You know, last time I checked, and so
hold on, I'm taking off my shoes.
Right. So, and not only that, you know, the numbers as far as how many days on market is usually about a third as well. So if it's typically sitting on the market for 30 days, if you put a for sale by owner sign out front and you're really marketing it and you're doing all the things right as an individual trying to sell it, it's going to probably take you closer to 90, right? So. All the math just doesn't make a whole lot of sense on that front. But me, as far as a professional goes, I'm going to want to have those conversations, building out expectations that, hey, I want to invite the most qualified buyers along, and depending on what Department of Justice makes or doesn't make me do, I'm going to posture it in a position so that we can get it sold the fastest and for the most money, if that's what my seller wants to accomplish.
All right. If you want to learn more about this, go ahead and text NAR to 623-AZ-RECON, NAR to 623-AZ-RECON, and we will walk through this with you and explain what this means to you as a seller. I think it's also important to point out is that though a broker compensation cannot be communicated on the MLS, does not mean that sellers don't have the option to negotiate that outside of the MLS. So I want to be clear on that. I think for a lot of sellers, because what this means in essence is you might have a lot of buyers who cannot afford to pay out of their pocket to hire an agent to represent them on the buy side. Okay, we'll talk about the risks involved with that in just a moment for buyers. But for sellers, I think that one of the consequences of this is sellers are going to get tempted to maybe perhaps save a bunch more money. And now they have a listing agent that is now working with both sides of the transaction. Now you got a buyer that is not represented. I think there's a lot of dangers to that for sellers.
Well, I think that really what it changes on that front is I've helped buyers, thousands of times, and we've submitted offers, and then a seller would counter back, oh, but buyer broker commission to only be X instead of Y. And that is inadmissible because it has nothing to do with the contract, right? Because there was already a contract between listing agent and buying agent before, but now that's basically legitimizing that. So if there was a written agreement outside of the MLS saying, hey, look, the commission was going to be 3%, and then a counter offer comes back saying that it's going to be 2%, now it is admissible. So I guess that's probably a big change over there. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Well, these effects are supposed to, if this proposal is accepted, supposed to take effect in July of this year. And if you are a seller and have questions, I guess the biggest question you got to ask is, do I want a scenario where I could potentially have more buyers coming because buyers agents are taking a look at this possible transaction and saying, I am getting paid, or do you just want to flat out not? And that's okay. And that's what the Department of Justice is saying. Sellers aren't required to, and listing agents aren't required to, but you do need to have a conversation with your listing agent about that, and we would love to walk you through this. All you got to do is text the word NAR, N-A-R, to 623-AZ-RECON. That's N-A-R to 623-AZ-RECON. All right, Justin, I'm going to bring you into the conversation because it looks like you're falling asleep here. So one of the second biggest things in reference to this proposal, and I'm just going to read this verbatim from the National Association of Realtors, is NAR has agreed to enact a new rule that would require MLS participants working with buyers, basically buyers agents, to enter into written agreements with their buyers. We have something here in the state of Arizona called the buyer broker agreement. And that is when you sit down with a buyer and say, listen, we may find a house where I, as your buyer's agent, am not getting paid a co-broke. If that is the situation, you have to agree to, through this buyer broker agreement, to pay for my compensation. It's a document that's been out for a lot of years. A lot of agents have been scared of it. Where buyers are now going to have to take into account is this is likely to become a required document. So if you are going to work with a buyer's agent, you in essence, and probably in other states, they're called other forms, I don't know, but in Arizona, you might be required to sign a buyer broker agreement. The problem with this is there's really no mechanisms in the lending industry to help buyers out who are buying a home through a buyer's agent, but they're having to pay for it.
Yeah, and I would say we have about, I would say at least 50% of our buyers don't have the ability to come up with these funds. They've already, a lot of these individuals we put on plans for multiple years and keep their eye on the prize. This is what you need. You need 3% down. You need to be able to cover a portion of closing costs, or we're actually going in relying on the seller to pay for closing costs. We're not considering what the buyer broker agreement states or what possibly a seller could offer on the home for their representation. So I do see this posing a problem, especially with our first-time home buyers, which we already have an issue getting first-time home buyers into houses based on affordability. And problems with affordability means that people have problems saving money as well. And when we're talking about purchasing, 400, I think the average purchase price right now is like somewhere around 470?
470, 480.
Yeah, I mean, to come up with an additional, just say 15,000, let's call it even 500, it's going to be extremely tough. And, there is small things that we can do, but it's not advantageous to our buyers. We can give credits that are in the form of seller concession, but that means taking a higher interest rate on the loan, which then takes their debt to income ratios up higher, which then again, more issues with affordability. And we can only pay those concessions based on loan amount because that's the way our rates operate. So yeah, absolutely. I feel like we just have to we're gonna have to see how this plays out. We're gonna have to see how sellers really look at this deal. And I would think that they would know that they want to, especially when you're competing with all the houses out there. You would want to bring incentive to bring buyers to your home. I think they think that with technology these days, we can see buyers just show up. But it's proven though with those stats on for sale by owners. I see it on my side because I do get to see the for sale by owner contracts on my side because these buyers come to me and say, hey, I need a loan. I'm buying this house from my neighbor down the street. There's not going to be any agent representation.
Well, you just have them text the word Ryan to 62380 and we can remedy that real fast.
Right.
But those deals tend to have some issues between buyer and seller throughout the process.
See, and that's where I'm leading to, Ryan. One of the unintended consequences here is I think it's going to put a lot of buyers in jeopardy because a lot of buyers aren't going to want to pay for their buyer's agent. A lot of them aren't going to be able to afford to. So the temptation is, I want to save money. Now I'm going to enter into a contract without representation. And we always compare it. It's like being charged with a crime. You would never go to court without representation because there is no good outcome.
And the people that are going to be affected the most, to kind of tie in what Justin's talking about, is our VA buyers. If they're fresh out of the military, they already have all these different constraints about what they can and cannot do with their VA loan. And so even if they wanted to pay buyer representation, bank won't allow it. So they're definitely going to be handicapped walking into the situation, or they're going to have to take a bunch of time off of work, family, or whatever in order to understand these documents that they're signing and the type of situation that they're walking into. I mean, is it just me, or does it feel like this is the government's way of saying, you know what, NAR, you guys are making way too much money. We want a piece of this. Well, because ultimately what they've done from what I see is they've kind of signed a death sentence for a number of different brokerages and for the National Association of Realtors under the guise of needing more transparency. And I mean, I haven't closed one deal where there wasn't exact dollar amounts about who's getting paid what, where, when, why, and how. And so and that they sign off on it. And so I'm over here like, well, I guess how much more transparency do you need? And they've also said, hey, look, you're also going to have to put on any MLS listing what the buyer compensation is so that the buyer even knows to the common public. So I just don't see how this gets things even more transparent. All I see it as okay, we're going to handicap the hell out of National Association of Realtors, which, okay. There's plenty of other platforms. I mean, most people are already looking at Zillow.com and Redfin and all these other platforms in order to get their information on what available listings are out there. So that's not really going to change much because they can't control what a private platform does. I can still go on to Zillow and say, hey, I'm happy to pay 2.5%, 3%, whatever it is that my seller and I decide that we want to offer a buyer's broker. I can do that on any of those platforms because NAR has they have no weight on them. And so I see this thing. I see NAR folding up their tents, and the Department of Justice or the Fed, Department of Justice or the Fed, one of their branches coming out and saying, you know what, we're going to create our own National Association of Realtors, and now we're just going to absorb those.
I think you're going to see a
lot.
lot of that.
I think so too.
Well, I was hoping that NAR would hold out until the general election coming up in November, and we're not by any stretch of the imagination a political show, but my intent, Ryan, was to write your name as President of the United States because I know you would make this all go away for me.
It's just funny for me because I think about it and like, realistically, this is how business has been done in the real estate realm for so long. And I see a bunch of commercial agents just crossing their arms, laughing their ass off, saying, welcome to our world, guys. But commercial buyers and sellers, they have a few more resources than first-time home buyers do, and they're prepared for that. And that's just kind of been the fabric of their industry for ever since commercial real estate has been a thing.
All right, so let's just break this down really quickly for you. Proposed settlement from the National Association of Realtors to the Department of Justice. Again, I emphasize this is a proposed settlement. In my opinion, I think it's going to go through. If you are a seller and you and your agent, your listing agent, have had a conversation about the possibility of offering compensation for the buyer's agent that no longer will be allowed as of the middle of July or to late July, will not be allowed on the MLS, doesn't mean that you can't offer it and your agent can't offer it. It's just going to be a sidebar conversation. For the buyer, you are going to be required to sign a buyer-broker agreement or something equivalent to it, stating that you are agreeing to pay your buyer's agent X percentage of the purchase price of the home. If the seller does not agree to pay your agent, then you will have to pay that in additional closing cost fees. But we'd love to break it down with you, talk about in depth more of our thoughts on this, how you strategize, how you work through it. All you got to do is text the word NAR, N-A-R, to 623-AZ-RECON. That's NAR to 623-AZ-RECON.